Welcome to the conversation. Jamaica's Andrew Holness has decided to forego his more than 200% salary hike. Was this done in good faith? Or is it causing more questions rather than answers? We discuss this and more with Professor Rosealea Hamilton, co-chair of the Advocates Network. Welcome to the conversation. How are you?
I am doing very well.
So let me just run right into the Jamaica compensation review. So we recognize that we have had a whole heap of issues as far as the compensation review is concerned, and this was primarily created to solve some of those problems. Could you tell us how and what were some of the issues that we had to deal with and whether or not it has been successful?
Well, one important thing that the minister pointed out is the number of salary scales. There were over 300 salary scales, and he was able to bring that down to about 16. Now, I think the minister should be commended on that. It's something that successive administrations have avoided. They've kind of kicked the can down the road, and we keep hearing about public sector reform and nothing. And I think that he decided to act on it is to his credit. I think there are concerns, though, about the process. And, you know, we saw midway the negotiations, the unions having to say, hey, we've been left out. You know, there's just this announcement that, you know, here are the categories or here, you know, and they've been left out. And I think that's such an important part of the process. You know, sometimes the process of coming to these important conclusions are as important as the outcomes themselves. And so I think the minister could have, you know, had a more inclusive process that could have ended differently. And in fact, part of the conversation even today is about the fact that the methodology used, the formulas used, and so on is not very transparent. So I want to make that point, and I think that it was a good effort to move from a very complex situation to the kinds of simplicity that we now have. Sometimes simplicity doesn't solve all the problems, but if it's more efficient and if it will save taxpayers' money, then I would applaud the effort.
Well, I'm looking at it, and there's a saying that my grandmother and my mother would use: too many cooks spoil the broth. And could it be that he's actually looking at it from the point of view that he already has a number of persons? There are a number of persons there that are using or doing this. Why include everybody or all and sundry? You know, could that be to his credit as well?
Well, remember, you know, you have representatives in the form of the unions that have gone through a democratic process to have selected their representatives. And so to the extent that you have the union reps, that's one thing. But remember, this process includes taxpayers' money. So all of us as citizens have a say. And in our democracy, the best representatives we have is our members of parliament. We've gone through an election process to select them, whether they voted or not. You had an opportunity to vote.
Yes.
And so the extent to which this is part of the parliamentary conversations. I mean, when you listen to parliamentarians today, they're telling you, well, you know, even their own salaries. We just heard about it in Parliament. We were not part of the process of determining some of the conclusions about the public sector salaries and, in fact, even their own salaries. And so I think at where we are now, we have been arguing that to avoid a repetition of what we've seen, which is an ad hoc committee, well, it's a transformation committee, we're told, who provided these recommendations. And I've heard the information minister said that there was no discussion at cabinet. They were just told this was the figure. And I assumed that they approved it, because if not, then, you know, I thought it was cabinet that made policy decisions in our constitution. That's their job. So it's a little strange what happened there. It's a little messy. But the fact that he said there was no conversation about those figures that ended up in cabinet for a decision is troubling.
So, well, we have oftentimes heard the ruling Jamaica Labour Party being described as being arrogant. some have said that they are poor at communication. Could this not be just one of those instances where they are poor at communicating both internally as well as to the Jamaican public?
Well, you know, I think it's a little more than that. The same arrogance that we're describing the GLP politicians, the same arrogance that we heard of the PNP after being in office for a long time. I think it's about power. It's about a lot of power in the hands of the executive that are unfettered. There's no effective oversight for these decisions. So issues get into subcommittees, for example. You have the parliamentary committees discussing. We were told, for example, that, you know, if the ruling party chairs these parliamentary committees, will be seeing much more efficiency and regularity of meetings and so on. We've seen no such evidence of that. And so what you have is the domination of executive decisions in our legislature. There's no effective oversight of executive decisions. And I suggest that if we want to avoid this kind of situation where, you know, cabinet decisions come to Parliament, they're simply rubber stamped, there's no effective questioning and oversight and interrogation and so on. If we want to avoid repeating this, we must change, look again at the structure of our Parliament, and we have to think about something different. We have a great opportunity now as we're talking about constitutional reform and as we move towards a republic.
So, sticking to the idea of salary increases, two things pops in my head immediately. So on one hand, we see where we have roughly 63, the political directorate is roughly 63 persons. Let's say I'm being generous and I put that up to about 100 persons. And we are looking at the increases given to all these folks. That might be a little bit more than, that's a few $1 billion. Would it have been better if we should move, don't give them an increase, and put that to everybody else? How much have a difference would that have made?
I don't think the discussion is that they shouldn't get an increase. I think everybody agrees that they, like most of the public servants, need an increase in salaries. The salaries were low. There's no debate. In fact, across the society, I mean, it's appalling that after 4 years of studying at the university, any of these universities, your university graduates are taking home less than $100,000 a month. I mean, those are low salaries. I think the question for the nation as a whole is, how do we increase productivity? How do we begin to produce globally competitive goods and services so we can earn more, we can expand the pie, lift the standard of living of all of us so that we're better off? That's the big conversation, all right? So I think the question of the political directorate and their salaries is particularly concerning in light of the significant size of the increase relative to the average that we were told by the minister in his closing budget was about 20% for 95% of the public sector workers. That's what we were told. Okay, now we know that some got 100% and 200% in the public sector. We were told that. And there are some people who are not seeing 20% when they look at the effective paycheck after tax, right? So there is that question about the size of the increase, and coming right after dialogues with the unions where they were told that they couldn't get any more, they had to hold strain, and it would disrupt this fragile recovery in our economy. That was the context. So it is in that context I think people are a little outraged that it could have been phased one, but importantly, the performance indicators that the Prime Minister told us is already in place. We've been asking ever since the announcement, please table them. Let's see those performance indicators. Those accountability measures, those are the terms he was using. Let's see them and let us be clear that these increases are justified on the basis of these performance metrics. In the absence of that, these increases are not just unconscionable, they are immoral. Oh,
so you have contextualized it for us. So in the context of an absence of accountability measures and KPIs, then these are unconscionable. But if those things are provided, then...
Well, first of all, we said it's the cart before the horse. you know, the Prime Minister have the thing backwards, because I would have loved to have seen, and he as much as agreed, that these performance indicators should have been presented up front. Because then we can see, I mean, clearly Jamaicans interact and see the performance of many of these ministers and parliamentarians, and they are not all the same. So all of them getting the same amount of pay is a problem in and of itself. But if you had the performance indications, and remember the Prime Minister told us that he's going to he'll have the ministers, the MPs, on a scale like public servants.
Yes.
Right. So we expect therefore differential pay.
Yes. But we must admit though that Jamaicans typically, whenever we hear about salary increases and politicians, we have an issue, because why is it that he deserves to get more than he's getting now? Because I remember when it was to be moved to $7 million, or to be moved from $7 million, persons were speaking against it, and now it's moving from $9 million to what it's going to be now, 20 plus.
Yes.
Then that's also an issue. So could it be that it has nothing to do really with the fact that KPIs have not been presented, but more so the fact that politicians ought not to?
But they're linked, because the idea that politicians are getting huge salary in the context of on astronomical levels of criminality, certainly with respect to our murder rate. We're talking about an epidemic murder rate, right? We're talking about an education system that has really hurt this society in light of the kinds of passes that we're seeing. Less than I think the 2021 education report talks about less than 30% of students leaving, sitting these exams, getting the required more than 5 CXEs with maths and English. So how are we preparing our young people for a world of work to be globally competitive if we have an education system in the state it's in? What are we paying for? And so on. We can go on. The point is, and let me make another point, this is important. The finance minister himself told us in the last budget debate that when you look at the GDP per capita, which is the average standard of living over the past 50 years, he pointed out, he told the nation that we're 20% less than we were 50 years ago. If that's the performance measure, these politicians have been failing us.
But some might argue then you pay for what you get. So what you have been getting is what you have been paying for.
Well, if that's the case, then they should not be talking about the great performance that we've been seeing. I mean, the minister has been talking about, this fast recovery out of COVID and so on and all these things. Look at our tourism minister and so on. So they've been telling us they've been performing well at the low rates.
No,
so what is this?
So it's almost like you started as an F student, and you have improved from an F to a C. So now you're saying, yes, we're doing better. And admittedly, you can say that move from an F to a C is better. But in the broad context of 50 years ago to now, that's really nothing. So it depends on what you're looking at. So might be, it's just a case where we're looking at the wrong context. Could that be the case?
Well, as I said, I think Jamaicans, in the final analysis, it boils down to, are you better off? Are you better off today relative to a few years ago? We just have to talk about pre-COVID, right? And there are a few Jamaicans who definitely are better off. Jamaica is now competing with Haiti in the region as the most unequal society. That's another issue. This move perpetuates inequality, because we're talking about salaries. We're not talking about perks. We don't start to talk about perks and opportunities that people who are part of the political class and a few elites in the society have that the ordinary Jamaicans do not have. Look what happened under COVID. We saw hundreds of Jamaicans, perhaps thousands of Jamaicans being arrested under the Disaster and Risk Management Act. Where are the people who we blatantly saw with our two eyes, who come from a different part of our society? Did we see arrests? No, it's incredulous that not one person who represents a politician, because either in the political class or who are part of this middle class or elite class in the society, not even one was arrested.
Wow. there's a lot more, and obviously, as we said, there's a whole leap more questions than answers. But we'll be right back after this break. You are watching The Conversation. Welcome back to The Conversation. Professor, the Prime Minister has decided recently, in light of all the backlash, to go back, to forego his salary. Does that make sense? In pure and simple, does that make sense?
Well, I think there's a conversation about the process, whether this was a unilateral decision, whether this was a cabinet decision. You know, those issues are still unresolved in my head. I'm not clear whether he simply stated this or there was a cabinet decision and so on. So that's one thing. But for me, perhaps the most important thing is why the Prime Minister did it. He framed the explanation in terms of a higher moral duty that is required on the part of political leaders. And he felt that he had to carry that burden. And for that reason, I agree with him, because he saw it as a moral problem. And therefore, he seemed to have agreed with us that the size of the increase was just immoral in the context of what the average civil servant was getting, etc. Now, I would love that moral leadership to have been used to persuade others in his cabinet and members of parliament to do the same. And therefore, I think that if we can agree that they are our political leaders and there is a higher moral duty, then I think on that basis, using that standard, those salaries should all be rolled back. And it includes the Governor General. The Governor General gets $34 million, tax-free.
Well, he's slated to get, yes.
Slated to get. But under the Income Tax Act, he does not pay tax.
Yes.
And Jamaicans are going to spend $440 million to pay for his office, and he's exempt under the Access to Information Act. So we don't know how that money is spent. Now, these kinds of arrangements must come to an end. I think it's unconscionable. I think it's lacking in the moral duty and responsibility that the Prime Minister speaks to. And I think for those reasons, all of these salaries should be rolled back.
Okay, so the Advocates Network have been involved in a number of protest actions, and the assumption is that they would have been communicating with members of the Finance Ministry. What were some of the discussions, what were some of the information that you would have been able to pull from that protest action, or from the protest action?
Well, what we've been getting, quite frankly, is a lot of support from Jamaicans. Many Jamaicans who say, I wish I was there, but I have to work. Although we tried to do it during the lunch hours so that people could take a break and come during their lunch hours. But I think we underestimated the fear in the society. There is real fear. There are public servants who say they are prepared to come, but they would have to hide their face. There are questions being asked about, where were you, and so on and so on. And that was surprising, the level of fear that exists in our society and how much people are not prepared to stand up for what is something as egregious as this.
Well, some might argue then that this might mean that it will just become another 9-day wonder. Are you of that opinion?
We've heard that. It's clearly not. We're way past 9 days. We're still protesting. We're still making our voice heard. We're still making the case that it is time. Listen, we've asked for some very simple things. One of the the easiest thing to do is to make transparent these accountable measures. Why is that difficult? The Prime Minister agreed that these accountability measures are important. Table them so that we can see it. These job descriptions that were promised from 2017, the Prime Minister is on record saying they are preparing these these job descriptions, right, for the members of Parliament. Now, listen, Does it take 6 years? I mean, like, how long does it take to prepare these things?
Well, some might argue that because of the consultations that are required, chances are if he had undertaken to do it in the same way.
Let me say this. We've been talking about a code of conduct from 2009. This was part of a national conversation. We had that national conversation when we decided to set up a Vision 2030. There were extensive conversations across the nation, and there was an agreement that we need a code of conduct for political representatives. Where is that today?
All right, so in light of that though, do you think that politicians lack oversight?
They absolutely do. Where is the oversight mechanism? It's supposed to be the parliament. It's supposed to be the legislature. And importantly, we have to remember, that you have both the executive and there's a dual role, right? You have people who are part of the executive who sit in the legislature, and the legislature, they're members of the legislature who are not part of the executive. Now, what is supposed to happen is that those who are not part of the executive must provide legislative oversight. What does that mean? There needs to be scrutiny of the decisions made. Were they compliant with the law? Is there abuse of power? Etc., etc. These are the issues that needs to be thoroughly investigated. Jamaicans should remember this, that the estimate we have of the level of corruption in Jamaica is about 5 to 7% of GDP. We're talking about $100 billion on an annual basis.
So that sounds like inefficiencies then, because should we not say that the parliamentary committees, the committees that are there, they are inefficient in carrying out the duties that are supposed to be or should have been assigned to them? They
lack the teeth because of the dominance of the executive and the arrangement we have
Integrity Commission and such?
Well, it's not just the external accounting measures. Remember, we have the Auditor General, we have the Accountant General, we have all of these mechanisms external to Parliament that does their job. They produce these reports. These reports go to Parliament, they're discussed in PAC, etc. All of that is taking place. What we're not seeing is when it comes to the Parliament as a body, that decisions are taken and consequences flow from the breaches. And the breaches have been documented. Remember, taxpayers are paying billions. The last estimate I saw is something like about $6 billion annually to these oversight agencies that do their work, right? They get to the Parliament and there's a bottleneck because there's no effective sanction.
So then, not to throw the blame at the foot of the feet of the Jamaican people, but is it then that we're not demanding as much as we should from those who we elect to sit?
Absolutely. A big part of the story of the last 60 years is exactly that.
60 years?
Yes, 60 years since independence. Mm-hmm. Because since independence, we have been part of a representative democracy where we elect our representatives in Parliament. And what we do is, for those of us who bother to vote, we vote them in and then we sit back, we fold our hands, we wait for them to deliver on all these promises that they make. And there's no effective dialogue with them. Many of us don't even know our representatives. There's no effective accountability because we don't demand from them responses and pose questions, ask, demand responses, etc. There's no effective check from we, the people who have elected. They're working for us. So we have the option, for example, every single Jamaican, to say to our MP, listen, we heard that a certain piece of legislation or something took place in Parliament. We don't really understand what it is. Come tell us. Come explain to us what law you just passed and what decisions were just made on our behalf. But before we even get to that as an after fact, we need to be able to say to our representatives, this is what I want you to do. This is how I want you to go to Parliament to vote.
Well, some persons might argue that for lack of wisdom or lack of knowledge, my people perish. Is it, could I start from the front to say that we don't know enough and we don't know what we don't know, and so as far as we're concerned, once you're there, you're going to take care of everything for us and we're good?
Yes, that's a good point because that's how we've been schooled.
How can we change that?
And we can change it by public education. And that is essentially why this whole conversation about the constitution reform and so on is critical, because the role of citizens in a democracy is key.
But if I have the power and I don't want to be questioned, what impetus will I have to educate you so that you are going to question me?
Absolutely good point about why this education process is about our own self-education. A big part of it is it. We have the internet. There's a lot of information online now. We need to Google democracy. What does that mean? We need to Google a republic. What does that mean? And you'll see the answers that speak to a central role for people. When we're talking about a republic, we're talking about a state in which people are sovereign, right? We're talking about democracy where the will of the people can be heard. These are the issues. Now, it's not as easy as the words, because one of the oldest democracies we have, our neighbors in North America, is struggling today with issues of democracy. And so it's not a destination that we get to. So we don't declare that because we have democratic elections, we are a democracy. When in fact, there are many undemocratic features of our parliamentary system today. And we've just seen it coming out of this whole pay arrangement. We just got announcements, and the very people who are impacted by it were not even included in the decision.
But admittedly, it doesn't make sense to have a system that's purely democratic or purely undemocratic.
And that debate has been settled for decades. We understand, in fact, the whole Greek experiment was about direct democracy, where every citizen has an opportunity to wade in. And we know that that's not very efficient. And so we've evolved a process of representative democracy. So we have to make that work, and we have to ensure that our representatives in Parliament has the power and has the capacity and has the resources to provide effective oversight on legislative decisions. Remember, if you listen carefully to the dialogue in Parliament, you'll hear parliamentarians going, they have to account to their constituents, and they're saying, boy, they don't understand why the road can't fix, all these kinds of things, because they're talking to the executive that has all of this power and resources, and their capacity to do things on behalf of the constituents is limited.
So could it be then that our parliament is just as, they say it's a microcosm of the wider society? Power is unequally distributed.
Absolutely.
In the wider society. Could that be the case with the parliament?
It is exactly so. And I think that's the conversation about a parliamentary structure in which the people's representative, those who are not part of the executive, has the power, has the capacity, has the framework in which they can hold the elected, the members of the executive accountable. They can provide effective scrutiny and oversight of their decisions. That's very important.
All right. So if the salaries aren't rolled back, what is your network prepared to do? What's the advocates network prepared to do?
You know our motto? We not ease up. We not ease up. What that means simply is that we will continue to push. We'll continue to push. So, there's a saying, you may win the battle, but you lose the war. The more Jamaicans, people's eyes begin to get open, the more they understand that we have a systemic problem. This is not about the individuals in power. We've had 60 years of observing the same reality. The incapacity of our political system to deliver the outcomes that we want. If you look good and you listen carefully to the analysis of even the politicians, many of them who've been and left the system, they'll tell you the system is broken, it's not working. So the Jamaican people must wake up and recognize that things have to change. And the most important thing that must change is our attitude to politics and governance. We have to see it as our civic responsibility to hold our elected officials accountable and to ensure that there are mechanisms in place that can prevent the abuse of power, the corruption that we see, and ultimately a system that delivers the will of the Jamaican people.
Wow. All right, thank you very much, Professor Hamilton, for having sat with me and for this robust discussion. Looking forward to have you again. We go to our second break. Please stay tuned. We'll continue on the conversation. Welcome back to the conversation. We go even further than we have gone before with Peter Townsend, President of the National Democratic Movement. Welcome to the conversation. How are you?
Thank you, Kwame. I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
So, a lot has been happening. We can start looking at the accountability mechanism for parliamentarians. But just before I do that, I see where you have written in the paper, in one of our local papers, about the salary increase that was awarded to the parliamentarians. What are your views on that?
Well, I believe that our politicians, like every other hardworking Jamaican, deserves to get a good pay, a good salary.
But,
however, I believe that the people who are running our affairs should not be the ones who are going to be in a position to grant themselves an increase of whatever size without any oversight body, without a formula that is set. In other countries, for example, in Trinidad, in Guyana, in the United States of America, in the Bahamas, the Prime Minister's salary, for example, is linked to 6 times the per capita income of those countries. So President Biden's salary, it cannot move more than 6 times the average income in America. Jamaica's per capita income is little under $6,000 US. And if we were to use that, for example, as a measuring, as a measurement, as a formula, the new increase that the Prime Minister has given himself would put him 32 times the per capita income of Jamaica. I have seen no other model in any other country where their head of state or their president or prime minister earns more than 6 times the per capita income of that country.
But is that the norm, though? Because when I'm looking at it was stated by the information minister, the de facto information minister the other day, that parliamentarian salaries are pegged to that of the permanent secretary, somewhere to the tune of 53 cents to $1 more.
Well, ministers, so remember now that these are the politicians that have set up this arrangement. But who makes it right? And so what they did, they pegged it to the permanent secretary. And they gave the rank and file civil servants a 20% raise in salary over a 3-year period. And then they gave the permanent secretaries a much higher, over 200% increase, because they know that their salary is pegged to that. So they had an interest to serve, right, when they raised the permanent secretary's salaries, so that they would have the excuse now to give themselves the kind of increase that they give themselves.
So you're saying that they're disingenuous?
Well, I believe so, because what rational or reasonable person would believe that you give your average civil servant a 20% raise, and then you turn around in the same economy and give yourself a 200% increase, and some people get as high as 300%. That doesn't happen in the private sector. I don't know what civilized part of the world that happens where there's such a massive increase being given one time. And in the same, and that came in the same breath that they gave the public sector workers only 20%, right? Which is hardly a livable wage for many of them. So for them to have to believe that the public would embrace them giving themselves up to 300% increase, having given the rank and file 20%, it behoves me. And when you compare their salaries with the rest of the region, because if you compare apples with apples, the Prime Minister of Bahamas, the Prime Minister of Trinidad, the Prime Minister of Guyana, our parliamentarians, our prime ministers, our ministers' salaries are way above the rest of the region. In fact, the Prime Minister's salary is rivaling the salary of the Prime Minister of Great Britain. How do you explain that? A bigger economy, a larger population. It's hard to see the justification in this level of increase.
The salary to come, that's what you're saying. The salary to come is rivaling that of
the new salary they have given themselves. And by the way, you know, them saying, the finance minister and the prime minister saying that this is to attract future politicians. It smacks of, you know, ingenuity, because for one, they have made a significant part of it retroactive to March last year. So it's not a futuristic thing, right? So it's a payday. It's a lot of jackpot for them. So it's retroactive to March last year. It's a big windfall. No, don't envy them about that. But they're also making the argument that it is to attract more people to politics. Now, I've never heard of any country in which you are using financial inducement to attract people to politics. People who go into politics are usually people who go in there to serve. Usually there's a noble side of it. And of course, they must be compensated. They must be able to live a decent standard of living. But it can't be about making the salary so attractive that you're going to attract people, because you're going to likely attract the wrong persons who, if they're coming into politics because of money, we have seen where it has gotten us in Jamaica. Because even though the increase, you know, the perception out there is that because of how government is run in Jamaica, right, and the eat of food culture, there is a thing they call the runnings, and politicians actually live high off the hog, which is not in line with their salaries. And so the argument that the current politicians are putting forward, those who did the increase, are saying that they need to pay them well so that they don't have to thief, in other words.
Wow. What would have been a better approach?
A better approach would be that they should, first of all, there should be a body that deals with the salaries of all public sector. An oversight body that does that. And there should be a formula. It should be pegged for prime ministers and ministers and members of parliament. It should be the per capita income of the country should be a factor, because if they want incentives, then an incentive will be to run the country right, to make the country progressive and productive, and you know, so you'd have an incentive to earn more. Right, but it can't be a situation in which you are going to grant yourself an increase without even looking in other jurisdiction to see how much out of line you are.
Understandably, we have a mechanism, but if you were to give me a figure, what would that figure be? Currently, the Prime Minister is making a little over $9 million. And the new salary scale, he's pegged to go as far as $25 million. What would a good figure be?
Well, it's not up to 25, it's up to 28 million.
What would a good figure be?
You see, I don't want to get into naming a figure, because it's going to look as if I begrudge what people are taking home. That's not it. It's just a principle of it, right? That you cannot give yourself an increase of over 100%. And it just didn't go over 100%. You went 150, you went 200, you went as high as 300%. Where in the civilized world that takes place? They didn't see a red flag. It didn't jump out at them that, hey, this will not go down right with people, having just given the public sector rank and file workers, the civil servants, who need incentive too, the policemen and women, or nurses, or teachers that have to go out there and do all that they do for this country. They deserve a livable wage too, you know. And so you're going to give them 20%. How on God's earth do you give yourself 200 and 300%?
Some persons might argue that because it's more. You know, will it cost them? Do you think it will cost them politically?
We hope so, but guess what? Unfortunately, both major political parties are on board with this. Under normal circumstances, when a governing party makes such an irrational decision, there will be a political price to pay, and there will be a backlash, and they will be voted out of office in short order in the next election. Unfortunately, the way we have operated Westminster, and we have entrenched the two parties in our lives, the demise of one is the ascendancy of the other. And so if the Holness administration should suffer a backlash as a consequence of what they did, it will be the PNP which will benefit from that and get into office when the same PNP has endorsed and hug up this increase. Their finance spokesman, Julian Robinson, made it clear that the opposition took no issue with the increase. In other words, they had no problem with it. But nobody's trying to walk back their talk to say, all right, we're going to give our increase to charity and our constituents. That's very good politics. So what kind of bad governance is that? So is the NDM, is the National Democratic Movement prepared to step up to that? We are. And that is why we are for a reform of a constitution that will deepen the political process and the system so that even new parties and independent candidates can emerge in position that they can contribute towards this country without this first past the post system, this bastardized version of the Westminster model as done by the two political parties. And so, back to the question you asked about the price that they'll pay, I don't know, because the PNP, which is party to the massive, vulgar increase, wants now to benefit from the consequence of Mr. Wallins and Mr. Clark's action.
So with that $28 million now, wouldn't the NDM do well with something similar to that?
You mean in the salary increase?
Yeah.
Why should our Prime Minister be pretty much on par with the British Prime Minister, which is a richer country, right? Our colonial fathers. So we want to rival our colonial fathers where they have an economy which is significantly larger than ours, a larger population, a larger parliament. What excuse do we have for a poorer country like ours to have to fork out money to pay our Prime Minister and it's on par with a first world country like Great Britain?
You tell me that's
I see no justification for it. To me, it was just a moment of madness when they came up with this idea.
But we have a CEO.
And we are hoping that the people will really push back continuously so that it's not a 9-day talk or wonder until they roll it back. They could roll it back to even 100% increase, right? But not 200, not 300%. And even 100% is vulgar. But I believe that people would live with it if it was, say, 100% or less, and at least in line with the other Caribbean islands.
So you're saying that $18 million for our Prime Minister is vulgar?
Well, everything has to be looked at in context. You have to look at it in context. Is Jamaica and Britain on par in terms of economy, in terms of wealth, in terms of population size, in terms of all the economic indicators? Where is Jamaica in relation to Britain, right? Britain can afford it. Can we afford it? And I'm talking about a cabinet, an administration that just told its public sector workers that we can't afford to give more than 20%. 20% is it. The teachers, they bawl, they beg, they beseech. The police, they bawl, they beg, they beseech. And they were told that, look, the country can only afford that. We were even told that they're going to postpone the local government election once again because the country can't afford it, don't have the money. But yet, how can you not lead by example? Where is the servanthood? Where is the visionary leadership? Where is the caring leadership to lead by example, to say to our people that, look, we have asked to take 20% and we are taking 20% as an example. However, they could put mechanism in place to correct any anomaly outstanding, phased in over a 5-year period, which would give their futuristic arguments some credibility, right? But the retroactive increase that they have done, it shows that that was just talk.
So the political directorate has roughly 63 persons. Let me put that up to 100. Mm-hmm. All right. And when you look at rank and file, public sector,
yes,
that's far more than 100 persons.
Right.
So it would seem as though it's easier to give the few a big increase than the majority a small increase, because if you should contextualize what the Prime Minister and the political directorate has gotten for themselves, wouldn't that be pittance if you should put that to the larger majority, because you're sharing it now with a bigger group?
Absolutely not, right? We can't just look at it as straight arithmetic to say because they are a smaller body, they could get a 300% increase and it's going to cost the country less than giving 20% to 300 or 400,000 people. There's a thing called equity. Equity, right? It can't be just straight maths. And in an event, it should align with a formula. You can't pay yourself so significantly above the per capita, the average income of the country, in a way that is so out. Remember, I've said the cap is 6 in other countries.
Yeah, but remember,
right? Including the smallest islands in the region and the big United States of America.
But looking at what
and
you
he's
said,
at 32 times.
But chances are you might be looking at the wrong formula, because we started out by saying that the permanent secretaries and then the members of parliament, their salaries are pegged to each other.
Who pegged it? Who did that?
I'm hoping that you'll be able to tell me.
Look here. you know about chess game, right? And you know about draft and ludo. Or people can set up the derricks so that they get their end result. So it's just another way. Remember, did you grow up hearing about Anansi story in Jamaica?
Yeah, but this has been in place for
Right.
more than 2 decades.
Yes, but remember, and Nancy has been around for more than 2 decades too, right? and so it's the Brian Nancy syndrome that these people who think they are so smarter than all of us, that they deliberately injured that way, and then now they went for the kill.
So they're playing the long game then?
Well, they have played a long game, and this is why now they think that their payday has come now to cash in their chips and to make this big haul and to haul in this loot at the expense of this nation.
All right, thank you very much, sir. We're going to our first break. This is the conversation with Peter Townsend. We're looking at a wide variety of issues. This is our final break. We'll be right back shortly. Welcome back to the conversation. So just before the break, you pretty much was indicating that you said brother, yes. So brother Andrew and brother Nigel playing Anansi.
Well,
with
yes,
the increases that they have gotten.
Well, the truth of the matter is that Anansi is still alive in Jamaica. You know, when Britain gave us that written constitution, which, as you know, Britain has an unwritten constitution, but Britain has strong conventions. And that's why their conventions work, because it works on the principle of honor and reasonableness. But it has been bastardized and contaminated in Jamaica by Anansiism. Because, you know, Anansi is a consummate general. And so it's a philosophy, the principle seems to be that, hey, if you can outsmart and outwit people and get away with it, then you are seen as almost a folk hero.
All right, so help me contextualize this though, because so you're pretty much saying that our leader, Ra Andrew, for purposes of the conversation,
Yes.
no, he's so outwitting the masses because he has now stated that he will forego his increase. And also, another member of the political directorate, the opposition leader, has stated that he will also forego, well, 80% of his salary. You are saying that they are engineering these things in hopes of outwitting people?
Look, no, the outwitting is what led, how they set up the public, the permanent secretary's salaries. There's been pegged to it, and then give them, the permanent secretaries, a big increase and that they could benefit. But I would say their so-called walk back of their increase has so much holes in it and leaves more questions than answers. Because let's look at the Prime Minister, for example, walking back his, he'll not take his. First of all, he hasn't said for how long would he not take it. That's one, right? Two, we have enough monitoring and giving account for when he starts taking it. Three, it would create an anomaly. So the Prime Minister will now be earning 9 million while the opposition leader is now earning 20 million.
Well, he's giving up 80%.
Well, no, but you have to take something to give it up, you know. They would have hugged it up. So this ingenious story about, oh, I'm going to take only 20% for myself and give the other 80% to my constituents. That is poor governance. Because you know what that is going to fuel?
So he's a part of the Anansiism too?
They're all part and parcel of this Anansiism. Right? So when you look at what Burmark, Andrew, and Nigel is doing, right? About them giving back a part of their salary to constituents, that is gonna do what? To fund Corrigoat and to buy votes. That one kind of worm, you know, that it's gonna look like they're gonna be playing the whole Corrigoat, the whole that kind of politics that we're trying to walk away from, where handout politics, right? If they are going to use that money to do that, why not structure their increase? Why not roll back their increase to a decent amount? Let us say they roll it back to 100%, and use the difference to do the social services, and let it be done by the state. It can't be the MP get their pay and decide that, hey, come here. They decide who is going to monitor, who they give that money to, who they help. It's going to be, you can bet, and Mary Vance is going to help her GLP supporters in West Portland. and Bra Mark is going to be helping these people in this constituency, and Bra Julian and everybody the same, right? So this, it just looks like a three-card game to tell me that, oh, we take the increase, but we're not going to really keep it. We're going to give the people them back some of what we get in our, after it comes in our pay package and we are taxed. We're not going to take our after-tax dollar to give these people. Does that make any sense to you? It doesn't add up.
So we have been looking, and over the years we have struggled. Jamaica has struggled to incorporate a third party. We have seen, well, the NDM is there, and we have looked at another political party. We have had issues integrating those in our system. What makes it different now, the NDM, under your leadership, and what are some of the inherent blockages that prevents you from getting into mainstream politics to compete formidably against the two that exists?
It is not easy for new political parties to survive in Jamaica. Remember, the PNP and GLP were a foundation. The PNP was the first political party in 1938, and then the GLP was formed in the early 40s in time to run in the 1944 general elections. They have become so entrenched, and how they have utilized the system, the political system, they have manipulated it in a manner that it makes it hard for any new player to get in, because they, as I've said before, they have contaminated the Westminster model, which relies on honor and reasonableness, and their inclination to be unreasonable has caused them to utilize the system in a way by virtue of garrison politics, handout, the nepotism and the cronyism. It's hard for you to break through that club to get into Parliament. And so it's hard for third parties, plus one matter of funding. And at one point, the strength of garrison politics that keeps outsiders out of constituencies, and because each party has a certain amount of garrisons, so they can neutralize each other, whereas new parties and independent candidates have no chance going up against that kind of a structure. So it has really been a difficult road, and that is why now that we are thinking of parting ways with the monarch and to chart our own way under a new republic, we need to reform the Constitution of Jamaica in such a manner that it deepens the democratic process, that people have more choices.
What are some of those recommendations?
For example, this first past the post system now, where we have a prime minister that is elected not directly by the people, is elected by his constituents to become member of parliament. His or her, I'm not talking about Mr. Hall necessarily, Mrs. Simpson Miller was there before. And because they are the party leader, elected by a handful of delegates, they become the prime minister for all of Jamaica. We are saying every Jamaican must get a chance, like in any other country, to get a ballot to vote for your prime minister on one ballot, and another ballot to vote for your member of parliament. Good governance in the country dictates that you need to have three branches of government. Three branches: the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary.
But we have that.
We have that, but as I said before, the Westminster version of that relies on certain conventions and reasonableness, which is lacking here because Nancy is still at play.
So we don't have the conventions.
No. So we need strict separation of powers, because although we have the so-called three branches, the Prime Minister is in the executive branch, he's the head, and he's also a member of Parliament. So he is in the legislature. He appoints a Minister of Justice who is in the cabinet, he's in the legislature, and he's in the judiciary. So this overlap sets the stage for lack of accountability. We are saying strict separation of powers will bring about strict accountability, so that a prime minister would not be an MP. So he or she should be elected on their own ballot, and they get their own mandate. And the MPs get their own mandate. And MPs cannot be ministers unless they resign their MP's position, because it's two different job descriptions. Not because you can win a seat doesn't mean that you can necessarily run a ministry. So we are saying, and not because you can run a ministry, you can necessarily run a constituency. So there should be separate functions. And if the Prime Minister sees somebody in the Parliament that they think would make a good cabinet member, they can appoint that person, but that person has to resign as a member of Parliament. Because remember, the role of the member of Parliament is to be the people's watchdog, make laws, and to hold the cabinet accountable. So if they are part and parcel of the cabinet and that overlap there, that incestuous relationship, It set the stage for corruption, nepotism, and cronyism, which is what we have.
But Sir Townsend, we're looking at the political directorate now. Wouldn't that sounds to me like as though it's going to be far more top-heavy than is necessary, because we have roughly 63 persons now.
Absolutely not. This thing is not about top-heaviness, you know. This thing is about a proper function democracy, right? And remember, we talk about the power by the people, of the people, for the people. We have to deepen that process. The people must elect these persons. And we are saying is that we just didn't elect them for just a physical exercise, just to have an election's sake. They have certain roles, critical roles to play for the state to have good governance and good order, right? And so if we are going to maintain those limbs, we have to have that strict separation. Where we will cut back on the jobs is that we don't need a cabinet of 20 and 19 as they have done before. We don't need a cabinet of more than 10, right? New Zealand, which is bigger than Jamaica, their cabinet size, their statute, their law limits it to 10, plus the Prime Minister.
Their structure admittedly is a little different. They are more nuanced than we are.
But look here, if it has served them, right? Look here, we don't have to reinvent the wheel because there's nothing new under the sun. So if we can't look at the best practice in other jurisdiction and create our own hybrid constitution, if we want to keep what we now have and claim that the British monarch, the king and the queen are our problem, we get rid of them, we are barking on the wrong tree, right? The problem with Westminster in Jamaica, as we have bastardized and Nancyized it, it's not the fault of the King of England. And so the absence of the king will not make it any better. And so it may make it even worse, because we'll not even have an oversight from them. And so our new colonial masters will be these local politicians who will run roughshod over the people, as they have shown the inclination to do. And this recent salary increase is an example of the arrogant way in which they do it. If you look at how it was announced and their actions since then, and their unrelenting, and this so-called walk back to give part of it to people, it shows to me a disrespect for people's intelligence in this country. They couldn't do it in Barbados or any other educated country, which are more educated people in the typical average population, right? And so, to me, they hold the people with disdain.
So you're saying that we're not as educated as our Caribbean counterparts, or is it that we're not paying as much attention? Because remember, you said anesthesia.
That is an indictment upon our political leaders and the system, and the educational system, right? We can't pretend the CSEC results speak for itself regionally in terms of the kind of passes that Barbados get compared to Jamaica. And in fact, one of the things that came out in a heated discussion recently among politicians in the two parties and Professor Monroe about back in 1962, when they passed his constitution upon Jamaican people, hurriedly in a 3-month window without consulting the people. And the excuse that they gave was that 82% of Jamaicans were illiterate at the time. And so they didn't think they would understand it. And that was the excuse of not consulting the people. Well, I want to know what is the excuse now. They need to really give the people real options. And I fear that what they may try to pass off on us is just to keep the same Westminster model, change the GG's, Governor General's name to President, but keep everything else the same, and give themselves some more power and privileges. And then now they put on the referendum ballot that you must choose yes or no in terms of you want to stay with the monarch or you want to go republic. That would be disingenuous. You need to give the people exposure to different options of political systems. Presidential system, where directly elected head of state, you want to keep the Westminster version. You have a third option, and let the people get that ballot to say, I want to directly elect my prime minister, or I want to keep the current system. Give the people real choices, but of course, educate them on it. Use JIS, go around the island, let everybody know, utilize all medias, WhatsApp, all social media. Let every Jamaican be aware and trust the people to make the right decision. So they underestimate the people's intelligence to make the right choices. So
is the National Democratic Movement prepared to do something or to undertake such an endeavor? Because what we're looking at, we don't want it to be a case whereby you come in and you have replaced one of those, because effectively you would have been Bra Peter.
Well, let me tell you, one of the main pillars upon which the NDM was formed and built, and that was what attracted me to it in the first place in October 1995, was the clarion call for constitutional reform. The NDM is committed. That's the heart of what we are about, to get the reform we need. I don't need a political career. I will never be a Bro Peter because I'm a successful attorney, I'm a successful financial advisor. I am not attracted to politics because of money. It is to get the kind of systems in place that we can regulate our politicians so that people with inclination to be unreasonable and to be irrational will be forced to, within a strict accountability framework, to deliver to the Jamaican people and to give account to the Jamaican people. That is what the NDM is about. It's not about taking our Westminster and run it and saying that all we want is just reasonable people who are pragmatic can run the country. No, we are saying the framework is critical. The constitutional framework is very, very critical in all of this. And the NDM is committed to that fight. We're going to be going across the island to have town hall meetings, schoolroom meetings, church hall meetings over the next few months to educate the people on these reforms that we are demanding.
All right, so if you could say something to the Prime Minister now, what would that be?
If I could say something to the Prime Minister now, I would say to the Prime Minister and his government and the opposition that, and those who are on the Constitutional Reform Committee of Jamaica, that they should ensure that the process on the road to a republic is properly organized so that the people get more than a fair chance of understanding their different options, different systems of government. It must not be a ballot that is about choosing yes or no to remain with the monarch or to be a republic. It must be choosing to have a presidential system where you'll directly elect your prime minister separately from a member of parliament, or you're going to stick with the Westminster model where you have two head of state, or sorry, one head of state, which is called the Governor General, which will be called the president in their proposed new dispensation, and a prime minister. So you're paying two heads of state, right? And if there's a third option, put it on the ballot that people will now look and make a rational decision that, look, I want this as the system of government in the Republic of Jamaica. So we are hoping that Mr. Prime Minister and members of the political directorate, that you will give the people that fair chance to take part in this upcoming referendum.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Townsend. There you have it, the views of Mr. Peter Townsend, the president of the National Democratic Movement. I am Kwame Thomas, and this has been The Conversation.